Thanks, Morgan. Okay. Let's give it a few minutes. Let's give it a minute or so and let more people come in, and then I can start my intro and let's set us off for the rest of the night. But thanks everyone for being here, and we're super excited to be talking to Rax King and Kelsey McKinney. It's going to be a great conversation. All right. Okay, so I have 801 and I'm going to start. All right, so good evening, everyone. And my name is Isa, and I'm a bookseller at Politics and Prose bookstore, and I'll be your host for this evening. And I'd like to welcome everyone here to PNP Live. Thank you for joining us in this virtual format amidst these extraordinary times, throughout all of which we strive to continue to bring you the authors you love and their new books to our Politics and Prose community. At any point during the event, you can click on the link in the chat to purchase Tacky by Rax King on the Politics and Prose website. And additionally, you can ask our speakers a question by clicking on the Q&A button, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. And while we'll try to get to everyone's questions after their presentation, we apologize in advance if we don't have time to address yours. And finally, we want to thank you for being here with us today. We're so thankful to our family of loyal customers keeping our business and our spirits afloat. So it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's speakers. Rax King is a James Beard Award nominated writer and host of the podcast Low Culture Boil. She is also author of the collection The People's Elbow, 30 Recitatives on Rape and Wrestling, which was published by Ursus Americanus Press. Her writing can be found in Glamour, MEL Magazine, Catapult, and elsewhere. Currently, she lives in Brooklyn with her toothless Pekingese. And joining us this evening is Kelsey McKinney, a freelance features writer and co-founder of Defector Media. She previously worked as a staff writer at Vox, Fusion, and Deadspin. Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, GQ, Cosmopolitan, and New York Magazine, among other publications. Her first novel, God Spare the Girls, came out in June of this year. So everyone, please join me in welcoming Rax and Kelsey to PNP Live.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming to celebrate my book, Tacky. I'm going to read from it for a few minutes, just a short excerpt, and then Kelsey and I are going to talk for a while. And then you can say stuff to us if you'd like, or Kelsey and I can just shoot the shit for an hour. That could happen. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from an essay in my collection called Never Fall in Love at the Jersey Shore. And it's about the show Jersey Shore, and it's also about my dad. So, my father had never favored reality TV that tried too hard for verisimilitude, which I believe was a large part of Jersey Shore's appeal. It was such an over-the-top simulation of what it was like to exist in the world. Freed from the expectation that he believe in the events on screen, he could instead engage with them on their own merit as articles of storytelling. He could watch Mike the Situation Sorrentino make out with a 20-year-old in a hot tub because he didn't need to suspend disbelief in order to do it. All he needed to do was laugh, cry, gasp. Jersey Shore excelled in the here and now, in events and shockers. It asked little of its audience philosophically. It required only that you absorb it. So he and I sat on the sofa, our respective cushions indented with our respective ass marks, the dog asleep between us and the coffee table groaning under our weekly deli spread. He inhaled cigarette after cigarette, smoking indoors, which had been verboten when he'd been living with my mother, but was his activity of choice in his bachelor pad. I knew better at this point than to try to wheedle him into quitting, or even taking his cigarettes outside where they could do less damage to his furnishings. Instead, I smoked with him, albeit at a more modest pace. He once claimed he only smoked 2 packs a day, really 3 or 4. Honestly, though, smoking occupied little of our attention. Jersey Shore was what mattered. We were gaga for it. We sensed something arch in other people's appreciation for Jersey Shore. They watched it for the same reason that we did, because it was entertaining, but needed to blanket that reason under protective layers of irony. We were proud that we didn't share this need to protect ourselves from our own taste, which we believed needed no correcting, had nothing wrong with it. An example: a couple years later, we bought matching t-shirts emblazoned with one of the show's key catchphrases, GTL, Gym, Tan, Laundry. We wore them every chance we got. His a little too tight around the middle, mine a little too massive everywhere. Gym, Tan, Laundry, said cashiers, servers, pharmacists, their tones bewildered. What's that mean? That's what you do to have a good night, one of us would respond, paraphrasing Mike Sorrentino's explanation of the daily GTL ritual. Otherwise, you'll feel off, and you're not going to have a good night. But if you feel great and look great, bam, awesome night. Hard to imagine two more implausible people to take these words into their gospel. Neither my father nor I had set foot inside a gym or tanning salon, like ever in our lives. As for laundry, that was best done every month or two, the better to wallow in one's depression at maximum capacity for the maximum length of time. I should say at this point that I loved my father. Lord, I loved my father. He was cool, man. Everybody fell for him. Everybody craved his attention. He was a tall, schlubby Jew with beard and glasses and a permanent food stain sitting atop the belly of all his shirts. And my friends wanted him to be their father, and my boyfriends hesitated to break up with me because it would have meant breaking up with him, too. Pinpointing his appeal is as impossible as explaining what's good about the rain. He was funny, but not every funny person is warm. Not every warm person is a good listener. Not every good listener gives good advice. And not every giver of good advice is selectively unavailable in such a way as to promote obsession. For every time that he was present and charismatic, he'd be a shell of unhappiness 3 other times. But, crucially, the first hit of his attention was free. I never understood the appeal, even as I was more enthralled to him than anybody. He was just some guy. But he had, pound for pound, more intersocial gravitational pull than anybody else I've ever known. And he loved me. He loved me. I was the object of his focus. As soon as I was born, forget about it. There was nobody else. Sure, his combination of extroversion and self-hatred left me reeling in his wake just as often as it delighted me. He was a difficult master to serve. But I served him, because nothing could have been more important than his approval. I had that approval more often than not. But he was who he was, and I was who I was, and that meant that any individual approval only ever necessitated some greater approval down the line. If I wrote a poem that he praised, it needed to win a prize. If I got an A on a test, I needed an A+ on the next test. This was not pressure that he applied to me. I built it on myself, brick by brick, until I was bricked up behind it, always certain that I was the one who could do something so wonderful that it fixed him, made him the happy man I thought he could be. It never happened, because that's not something that one person can do for another. Inasmuch as I wish he'd done anything differently, I wish he'd known to tell me that. Point being, my father loved Jersey Shore in 2009, so Rax loved Jersey Shore in 2009. It was our ritual for the 3 weeks that winter break lasted. He scooped me from my mother's apartment in his convertible, and we drove to the local deli for half a pound of thinly sliced Hebrew National salami, 1/4 pound of corned beef, a loaf of thinly sliced marble rye, not the New York rye, marble rye, 1 brisket plate, a box of latkes, and whatever cheese was good that week. And then on to his house, his dog, Jersey Shore. Plus, of course, our intensive post-Jersey Shore analysis. Thank you.
Incredible. Love to hear you read. I know a lot has been made of this book online about how funny it is, which is absolutely true. But I also think this book is incredibly emotional and that you do a lot of like heavy emotional work in it that I found really transportive and incredible. But also, it fucked me up to think about my own time in the mall as a child. So that's exciting. The first question I want to ask you is when you knew that the center of this book would be tackiness, like when did you understand that that was a driving force in your life?
I mean, I think that the understanding that it's a driving force in my life really comes from insecurity on my part. I mean, specifically this very teenage insecurity that whatever pop culture appealed to me had to have been the wrong kind, which I think is, most people think that and they're just being too self-conscious, like they could relax. But it was true for me. Like I was really into Creed and, fast food and Jersey Shore and just all kinds of shit that, my friends who were a bunch of DIY punks and whatnot, they were just like, what is wrong with her? Like, what, she likes our stuff, but she also likes all this terrible stuff. And the terrible stuff tended to stick with me more in like a more informative way emotionally, I guess. It was more formative for me. And so when I began writing the essays that comprise this collection, I had it in my head that I wanted to talk through like moments in my life through the lens of whatever pop culture was stuck in my craw at that time. And as I went along, it became increasingly obvious that like all the pop culture I was talking about was just tacky as hell in one way or another. And I just, after getting a couple rounds of like feedback from other writer friends and responses to queries from agents and whatnot, like so many people were using the word tacky to describe this manuscript of mine that did not have a name yet. And I was just like, okay, let me take the hint and let's just do this the way that it is being heavily suggested to me. So I guess that's where that comes from.
Yeah, I feel like it's funny though, because a lot of the things in this book, as I was reading it, I was thinking about like 2014 internet culture and how everyone was like a poptimist and trying to like make essays about Britney Spears into like scholarly pieces of work for academic journals, which was like fascinating, but also extremely annoying to like me as an individual. And I wanted to ask you about like how you kept the joy in this book, right? Like you're dealing with a lot of emotional shit. You've got all of these things that you could over intellectualize and you don't.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was important to me because I mean, it is a book of some criticism for sure. Like there is cultural criticism in there, but I didn't want to write one of those super tiresome, like Britney Spears and Foucault type shits that you always see on websites I'm not going to name here. But that was a type of essay that I wanted to avoid. And I also wanted to avoid the overly self-serving personal essay where like, I think you don't see them that often anymore, but it was a real type of essay when I first started writing this collection where like the narrator is the most virtuous person in their entire sphere, and it's an essay about all the wrongs that have been done to the most virtuous person. Like neither of those was where I wanted to land. I wanted to talk about my experiences as a deeply flawed person who just loves certain kind of silly things, and the love was really the crux of it for me rather than the pop culture itself or even me myself. Like that experience of hearing a song for the first time and not yet knowing that your friends think it's uncool, and it just brings you this jolt of joy right away. Like that was the moment that really interested me, and alongside it, the moment when you realize you're being uncool and you have to like scale it back somehow. Like those were the two moments that I was most interested in exploring throughout the course of my life as they've appeared.
Yeah, I love that. I wrote down a quote that you wrote, so I apologize in advance for reading your own writing back to you. But you wrote that I'm uneasy writing this breakup scene, which tells me that I must. And I underlined it in my book because I was like, I have 15 questions about this, but the like primary one is how do you, one, how right? Two, that's a really like poignant thing to say in a book that's about yourself. I assume there are some things that you want to keep close to yourself. Obviously, it's a tightly edited book. Like, how do you choose which
Yeah,
parts
no,
to
for
share for the
sure.
public? And
It's
also how right. I
how
would like
right.
the answer to that as well.
Yeah, I wish I had an answer for you. I actually, as we've said, I don't know how to read, so I
Yeah.
certainly don't know how to write. That's something I cannot help you with. I just kind of shut my eyes and go with God. But to the other aspects of that question, it is a tightrope walk for sure, because you're right. There are a lot of things in the course of my life where I want to keep my own counsel, or I only want to talk about them with close friends. And I think that because the type of writing I do is still so personal and so revealing of things that people are mostly ashamed of, I think people get the impression that I just have no secrets and am an open book. And that's not the case. Like I am choosy, but it is important to me still to not shy away from those moments when I'm thinking through the course of my life or some event that's happened in my life, and I'd start to get squirmy and uncomfortable because of course that's a really big tactile aspect of memory. I think is like if you have an embarrassing memory like late at night when you're trying to fall asleep, I don't know about you, but I'll like thrash around in my bed like a spit of meat, just uncomfortable and trying to make it go away. And that moment in particular, I think is really worth sitting with as any writer who writes about themselves. Like that's the moment to excavate more fully and explore. Not so much the open wound traumatic stuff. I think that's a misstep. I don't really want to be writing from an open wound ever. But if something makes you squirmy and squirrely and uncomfortable, there's something real in there that you haven't reckoned with the reality of fully. And I mean, one thing about writing those moments in all their uncomfortable detail is it does often have the effect of exorcising whatever I was so uncomfortable with, because the reality is that most of the shit in this book happened like 10, 15 years ago. So it really shouldn't have that kind of power over me anymore. And that power is important to reckon with and exorcise to the effect, to the extent that you're able.
Yeah, I felt there's a section of the book where you're talking about the mall. I do not remember the name of this chapter, but when I was reading it, you were talking about the feeling of walking past the Hot Topic and like desperately wanting to be inside the Hot Topic, but also one being like kind of afraid of it, and two understanding that like the status symbol was in limited two and that's where you were supposed to go. And I was like, oh, this is like, I am uncomfortable reading this, which is, I did not sit with it. I blew right past it. So my own problem. One thing that I find really not ironic, but it is kind of funny that you do take this stuff really seriously. Your book is beautifully written, and I'm curious how you balanced the like knowledge that you're creating something that is considered high art, right? Like a fancy little book, and being like, I love this whole book is about like how much I love Guy Fieri.
Yeah. I'm definitely going to write like a 900-page tome just
Great.
about my love for Guy Fieri, like in epic verse next. So look out
Perfect.
for that, everybody.
I can't wait.
But yeah, that did get tricky because I think there is the risk in writing about this stuff. I mean, as you said before, people do sometimes take it too seriously.
Mhm.
And I don't really feel that that's an appropriate thing to do with any pop culture being produced by these like mega rich, mega successful people, which does constitute many of the pieces of pop culture that I'm talking about. So it's again, it's a little bit of a tricky balancing act. I don't want to be lionizing any of these creators who straightforwardly do not need any help from me. Like they're chilling, they're fine. Maybe not Scott Stapp so much. He seems like he's had a hard road, but like just about everyone else. But at the same time, like the work that they've made does get shit on a lot, and the shitting is significant to me, and also the joy inherent to engaging with something that's super popular that you happen to love, that's also significant to me. Like I think it's worth paying some homage to really any piece of pop culture that's been significant and formative for you, regardless of what its status is among like the intelligentsia or whatever, like regardless of what other people think at all. It's, it's a matter of taste, it's subjective. And if the thing that you like isn't actively harming anybody, that like the example that I always seem to come back to is Marvel movies. I think that that is really doing some harm. It's like flattening the media landscape completely.
Yeah.
Every other movie seems to be like a bluish gray tinted superhero movie that's just super serious. I think that does harm. And I think that let people enjoy things only goes so far as a philosophy when it comes to like covering the effects of harm. But something like Guy Fieri, like that dude is just out to have a good time in his Camaro. That dude is doing very little harm.
Please stop stealing my questions ahead of time. That's extremely rude. But I think that that's a really delicate line to walk, right? Of like, let people love things, which is often used to like dismiss criticism in general, right? Like we can't be critics of anything anymore. We just have to like allow everyone to like whatever they like. And I don't think that is what criticism is, right? It's not, you're not saying you can't like this. You're saying there are flaws with this thing, perhaps. How do you reckon with that? One, and two, when you're like looking, like, how do you determine what's harmful?
Right. I mean, it is a very personal metric. Well, maybe not that personal, because in that same Marvel movies example, I feel like the harm being done is fairly straightforward once you sit with it for a little while. But like in the essay that I wrote about Creed, this does come up because as I recall, and I read a bunch of reviews of Creed's albums from the time that they were released to confirm this for myself, critics weren't criticizing them. It was a really strange attitude that everybody seemed to be taking, where like they had to engage with the music of Creed because it was crazy popular at the time. There was really like, it would have been the elephant in the room otherwise. There was no not engaging with it. But it didn't fit into this paradigm of what was critically acceptable at the time either. It was popular without any critic types thinking it was good. And you end up with this really bored, flat affect review that just repeats itself across different writers and different publications, where all it says is this album is bad. It's bad because the guitar sounds bad and the vocals sound bad and the lyrics are bad. Like it's just pure tautology. Nobody seemed able to convincingly explain why they thought this Creed album was bad. And I think that's where the critical responsibility comes in, is that's not criticism. Like, yes, absolutely outline the flaws with something that you think is flawed, but treat them with respect. Like treat this thing that somebody made to be listened to, probably took them some time to make it. That's an act worthy of the bare minimum respect. Even if you are openly panning some album, you should be able to say why beyond the point of like, what do you want from me? It's bad.
Yeah, I think obviously like all works of art are political. And I think there's a great undercurrent in your book of like classism in general that's woven through this. And in the Creed essay, you say something about like millions of people like it, right? Like there are just hordes of people who love Creed. There are hordes of people who love the Dave Matthews Band. Like, why won't you take them seriously or consider like, why? Even if you don't like them, like, why is this something that they want? And I want you to just talk about classism, which I know is not a question, but please,
talk about
if
classism
you will,
now.
consider classism.
Yeah, it's a real undercurrent with, I think, the entire theme of tackiness is, and I've been thinking about this kind of in real time at these events, because one thing that everybody seems to be interested in is like what makes something tacky to begin with.
Yeah.
And what it is a judgment call. Like you're saying that something is bad in a very particular connotative way that like when you sit and think about it, doesn't map onto anything real. Like my podcast co-hosts and I were looking at this late 19th century dictionary type definition of tacky, and it offered these examples that didn't track in modern thinking. Like one of the examples was if you go into a store and there's a bow sitting on the cash counter, that's tacky. And like if you wear a shawl at the wrong time, that's tacky. Just stuff that doesn't even have a counterpart anymore. And I think where the classism tends to come in is in the contrast that's implied by tackiness. Like, presumably at some point in the 1800s, if you went into a store and there was a little ribbon sitting on the counter or whatever, that did mean something, and it meant that something was off. It was off in a way that you probably couldn't put great words to, but it was off in a recognizable way. And I think the same thing is said of people who are fans of Creed, despite their obvious badness. Like these dumbasses in Florida and, you know, Tampa, whatever, they just don't know what's good for them. You know, there's something is off in their taste. You can't pinpoint it beyond saying that it's bad, but you're going to say it's bad regardless. And I think the same classism does actually go in the other direction. Like when we talk about how tacky the Real Housewives are with their, you know, it always seems to come down to what they wear and how they decorate their homes. And, you know, if we had their money, we would do it all differently. We would have taste. We're saying the same thing, but just backwards in that case. Or, you know, Donald Trump with his well-done steak and his ketchup on the side.
Right.
If we had that much money, we would be getting rare steak with no ketchup. And
you're better than you.
Yeah. So you're pointing a finger, you're saying you're doing taste wrong. I know the right way, but by and large, it's really hard to quantify the reason that you think that's the case. It's, you know, you just think you know it when you see it.
Yeah, I loved in your, again, I can't remember the essay titles, but in the essay about Josie and the Pussycats, I loved that there's this, like, it takes so long to get to the reveal that this boy that like had enraptured you didn't like it. Right. Like, and that was like just brutal and unacceptable. And it really made me think about how much of this is like a mirror, right? Like tackiness doesn't exist without exposure to other types of people, I guess. And I'm curious, like how often that happens to you now.
Less often, but mostly because I think, well, you know what? I'm going to say the opposite actually, because I'm an active Twitter user. So I come in for all kinds of weird, senseless judgments that I think are essentially the same judgment. It's, you know, when people are flaming you on Twitter, they're not really saying anything about you. They're just talking about their own sensibility and their own taste. And you, some guy that they saw on their timeline, you don't fit into it. And they gotta point at you about it. Like it's a compulsion with some people. Like they can't live with themselves if they aren't right. Exactly. They got to be pointing the finger, lest it be pointed at them, is my suspicion. But beyond that, like in more sensible settings than Twitter, I don't really come in for that kind of judgment that often anymore. And I think it's because I've gotten better at protecting myself. Like I'm in those conversations that you're forever having with new friends or first dates where you have to say what kind of music you like and what's your favorite movie and shit like that. I am so opposed to being the first person to reveal that stuff. I never want to open the door. The other person has to somehow give me permission to like the things that I like. And if they don't give that permission, I have this totally alternate list of stuff that I do like. That, you know, it's like having a secret menu.
No, I'm just laughing because like as you're saying this, I'm realizing that I do it, right? Like my favorite movie, like hands down, is Talladega Nights. Like I love that movie. I think it's so fucking funny. And if someone across from me is like, oh, I love this, like, I don't know, fancy, like Ingrid Bergman film. I'm like, I too like Ingrid Bergman, which is true, right? I do like it, but it's not my favorite film, right? Because like, but there's a need to like perform that you're not tacky, even when you're aware of this, that I find really interesting.
I think it also operates on this secondary level where like if you were talking to somebody and they were to preemptively say, you know, my very favorite movie of all time is Talladega Nights,
Yeah.
you would jump right in there probably.
Yes.
You wouldn't feel that same need to protect yourself
No.
from your own taste. And I think there's something about that need to get permission from someone we think of as better,
Yeah.
more cultured, smarter than ourselves. And something interesting about the way that's worked for me is I tend to assume that's the case of just about everybody.
Yeah.
Like I'm not going to be talking about no Talladega Nights to any stranger ever in my life. And something about that tells me that I think any person I'm talking to all the time is cooler than me in that unquantifiable way. Even though I don't believe in it anymore, it still plays a role in my life.
You mentioned your Twitter, so now we have to do that. Well, I want to do the touching art one in just 1 second, but the first one I want to do is that you tweeted about the word brave being used in this book, which I, having read your book, when I saw that was like, who's saying this? And like immediately went to Google. But do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I think that what I said on Twitter, for people who aren't as unwell as Kelsey and I are,
I have it written down. I can read it.
Oh yeah.
If you
what
want.
did I say?
You said a girl writing about bad shit that happened to her is not inherently brave.
Yeah. And I think that when people enjoy like a personal essay or a memoir or some other type of writing that tends to focus on like bad stuff that has happened to the actual author of the book, brave is a word that seems to come up a lot. It seems like it came up especially a lot with my chapbook that I released in 2018, which is about rape pretty heavily. And people just kept saying like it was so brave for you to write that. And I know that I sound like I'm humble bragging right now, but I really hate that as a compliment because I don't think there's anything brave inherently about documenting your experience, regardless of what that experience is. I mean, I'm not whistleblowing. I'm talking about something shitty that happened to me on this like micro interpersonal level. And there doesn't have to be anything brave about that. It's just, you know, I would rather people engage with my writing, even though it is personal, on the craft level rather than the, you know, doing therapy on me level.
Yeah, it's funny to think about like someone walking through your like living room, if you write anything like me and you're like crouched over like this and then being like, wow, so brave.
Yeah, like writing is a
girl of all.
undignified bullshit thing to do. I do it every day and I'm always a little embarrassed for myself. It's not brave. It's just not.
What you also tweeted something about how you want to touch art. And I found this very funny because I love museums and also want to touch art. And I'm very often surreptitiously touching it without permission. But I was like, this is very good promo for your book. Like when I saw the tweet, and then I was like, oh, a lot of people are very angry about this. And they really are very upset about the idea of you touching art. People used to smoke in museums, but sure.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I would not be the first one to touch the art by any stretch.
Why do you want to touch it though? Like, what is it that draws your hand toward it?
First and foremost, I just want to give a shout out to the 18-year-old people who have taken one art history class and know one thing about what happens to art when it gets touched by an asshole like me, and just came down on me with the fury of the Lord with that one piece of information that they learned. There was no need for that shit, but I respect it. It was the most devoted anyone's ever been to like not touching stuff. So good for them. That said, I genuinely do. I mean, I wouldn't actually fondle art if I thought I would maybe get caught for it because, you know, you have that little alarm when you get too close to it. Don't like that sound. But I do want to experience it. I mean, it's a form of hunger, I think. Like, I want to immerse myself in these great creations that I'm like standing in this whole room of incredible creations and I don't get to touch any of it, really. Like, Just because someone painted it 700 years ago, just make more paintings. There's paint. Make new ones. I'm going to touch all of the paintings next time I'm in a museum, actually.
You're just trying to create jobs, restoration
Exactly.
jobs. You're a job creator, really.
I
if you
am
think about
very
it.
much. Yeah.
But this is part of I know it's like lame to bring up tweets in a conversation, but I wanted to bring it up because I thought that you would say that like there's a hunger almost for like experiences and this like desire to touch things and interact with them that I think is central to the book that you've written, right? It's like almost a greediness for like feeling of like, how do I have more feelings?
And part of me feels like it's got to be a relatively recent rule, right? I mean, within the past couple hundred years. I mean, I'm kind of joking, but I'm also like, there has to have been a time in history when.
Do I look like an art historian to you, Rax? I have no idea.
I didn't take that one art history class that all the people in my mentions apparently took together. So I just, your guess is as good as mine. But my assumption is that at some point in history, when people made art, there was a way to experience it in a more tactile way than being in these frigid museums surrounded by dozens of other tourists, like taking in a little fraction of the experience. You're not getting the whole Mona Lisa vibe standing behind like 10 Italian people with their cameras and like socks and sandals and shit and focusing on all this other sensory information that's descending on you in that same room. It's just not the same as, at one point Da Vinci painted that painting and other people came into the room where it was, and I'm sure it was quiet and not full of tourists, and it was just a very different way to be around art. And I think that tactile experience is sort of missing from the high art world anymore, because high art is very protective of itself, and I think very rarefied now. Like, it's kept in mostly very expensive to visit museums, like surrounded by other art of its same kind. It creates this expectation that like, here in this room, I am having a high intellectual experience. I have to figure it was not always that way.
There are like anecdotes about the abstract expressionists, about like people going over to Pollock's house and like putting both hands onto the paintings to like feel the thickness of the paint. And when I read this in some biography of women in abstract expressionism, I was like, this isn't fair. I was like, I want to do that. Like, I want to feel it, but there's too much money to be made in the, like, it's a trendy word, but in the gatekeeping of these experiences, right? In saying like only very rich people get to do it. And that's kind of the beautiful thing about all of the culture in your book, is like, none of it, you can turn on Food Network at any time of day and see Guy Fieri and have a great time.
And yeah, I think that is part of why the sort of stuff that's in my book, regardless of whether the particular things in my book are important to you, I'm sure that's not going to be the case for everybody, but I do think everybody has a handful of things that they are a little bit secretive about and a little protective over. And I think it's mostly going to be their very favorite things that they feel that way about. Mm-hmm. And I think you're really getting at something with this idea that, with the movie Josie and the Pussycats, you can absolutely touch the art. You do not have to worry about offending the movie's legacy with like an ill-placed word or whatever, the way you might worry about it with, making an out-of-pocket remark about Rashomon or something. Like, it's just, it's two very different types of things. Both are highly enjoyable. I loved Rashomon, but it's just, it's not going to get inside your soul in that same way. I mean, maybe that's a goofy way to put it, but I think it's real.
And part of that is about accessibility, right? It's like, you can allow it into your soul because you can watch it 500 times, which is useful. We do have a question from the chat, and it is, the pieces of popular culture that you write about are also tied to youth, but what do you think is considered tacky in your adulthood, or what things are tacky to you?
So this has been asked to me a couple times, and I haven't really known the answer until just yesterday, when I remembered that I have been desperately wanting to write like a critical reassessment of the music of Billy Joel. And no one will let me. Nobody is interested in hearing my just conspiracy theory about how fucked Billy Joel was by the rules of pop culture. I mean, to my mind, he wrote some beautiful music, very cynical songs about fucked up people.
Yeah.
I see a universe that, we took the other fork in the road and we let him have the same career that Bruce Springsteen had. And that's not the way it shook out. Like, Bruce Springsteen was writing similarly overwrought songs. And I say that as a huge Springsteen fan, but, Born to Run is a very extra song.
Oh, yeah.
Like, no more extra than more extra than a lot of stuff that Billy Joel has done. But Billy Joel is the one who gets classified as like schlocky for whatever reason. Maybe it's all the car accidents. I don't know. He loves car accidents. But for whatever reason, like, he was making something that I think was straightforwardly for adults, like grown-up music about grown-up ne'er-do-wells.
Yeah.
And so many adults loved it, and so many adults who thought they were smarter than the other ones were like, actually, no, this is bad. That to me is a pretty perfect example of what like grown-up tacky looks like.
Yeah. Are there any things that you think are tacky right now?
Ooh, I think a lot of what happens on Bravo is pretty tacky.
Just in general on the Bravo
Just
channel.
the stuff that's going on that network. I feel like when I was little, it used to be a very different network. Didn't they show opera and shit? Yeah, they don't do that now. They show much better stuff.
You don't consider the things on Bravo opera?
It's absolutely opera. You're right. Yeah, it's just unscripted opera. It's opera in real time.
We have another question for you, and it's, what do you think about the irony-laden attitude toward liking anything these days?
Oh man, it bums me out. As I'm sure you could guess, anonymous attendee, because my whole shtick is, fuck you, I'm gonna like it anyway. And I think there's a lot of reasons that's a tricky attitude to take with pop culture anymore. Everything seems to be filtered through so many layers of irony anymore that even if you do love something sincerely, as I do with, like, for example, Jersey Shore, I always have to be on the lookout for this self-protective irony that I might employ to keep myself safe from criticism for liking something stupid. I catch myself feeling that way all the time. And I don't entirely know where the irony comes from. I mean, it's been the subject of like all these essays lately, and everybody seems to agree that it was a very 90s attitude that folks thought had died with, the advent of David Foster Wallace, and not so much. It's having a revival period. But I think that irony in general, like excessive poisonous irony, is a coping mechanism that's dishonest and unsuccessful. And I think my own coping mechanism of, watching Josie and the Pussycats 3 times a year is no better, really, but at least it's honest. And I can feel kind of good about the fact that whatever I like, I do try to like sincerely. I don't have to have all these negotiations with myself where I have to give myself permission to like something. I have to decide that if I like something, it's actually campy and that makes my taste good. Like, none of that is real necessary to me. And I think that's something of an improvement.
That's an interesting word, right? There's a triumvirate of words here, right? Like, it's like tacky, trashy, and campy. Can you explain the difference between these words to me?
Yeah, I can and I will.
Great.
To me, campy means you watch something that was made for serious art reasons, and you decide that it's absolutely terrible, but you're also able to find an ironic appreciation for it. I think that the appreciation itself is sincere, but it's for irony-tinged reasons. Like, the performances are so over the top, or the costumes or the music or whatever, like so self-serious, so over the top that they don't bring you joy on the intended level, but they still bring you a sort of private personal joy. Like, Tommy Wiseau's The Room continues to bring that exact sort of joy to people every year. And he's kind of made a career out of being like the accidental irony guy. And, he goes to movie theaters and takes pictures with fans, and all this on the strength of making what many people consider the worst movie ever made. To me, that's like the camp approach. The tacky approach is you find joy in the thing as intended, and then you have to go back on your joy later when somebody else tells you that it's wrong. Somebody with better taste than you in your imagination. Trashy is tricky to me. Trashy, I feel like, is tacky without the joy. It's like something happens, you don't really enjoy it, you just kind of consume it and have a neutral experience. Like I think I write as an example in my book when Kid Rock's sex tape leaked, and everyone was just like, that's a bummer. Like, this guy, we already don't like Kid Rock. We don't really want him to be having sex. We certainly don't want to see it. Yeah. So I think that is when people would use the word trashy, is when the tacky thing happens, but it just bums everybody out.
Yeah, I like that, like, tackiness is a joyful root, right? Like, that's beautiful to me. Okay, how do you find the next tacky thing for yourself? Where are you encountering tacky things in the wild?
In the wild, oh man. I feel like this is going to sound like kind of insulting to a person that I have no desire to insult, so I'm going to disguise him a little bit.
Great.
I have a preferred fish salesman. And
we all love to buy fish.
We love to buy fish. Love to go out on a Wednesday and buy me some fish. But he's just something about him. He's just like this super Italian-y Brooklyn guy, and he's got the accent, and he always seems to be like holding a fish by the tail, like a fishmonger in a cartoon. And he's just like a wall of talk. Every time my boyfriend and I go into this fish market, we get hung up for 20 minutes talking about this man's like grandchildren and his parking space and how he like owns the building, and that's how he keeps his prices low. And it's a strange experience, but it brings me exactly that joy every time. It's not a piece of pop culture. It's just a guy in the neighborhood, but I love him in exactly the way that I love Guy Fieri. I'm just like, feel very protective of him. I would never want to introduce like Twitter haters to this man, because it's never the twain shall meet. If you have the irony attitude, you cannot love my fish man. It doesn't compute for me. And that maybe is not the most precise answer to that question, but it rings very true for me. I'm going to go with my fish man.
I like it. I believe it. This is a fun question. Which celebrities would you love to take on a date to the Cheesecake Factory?
Guy Fieri, obviously.
Obviously.
Number one. I've been trying to get his attention for years, and he will not love me, and that's okay.
Send him a copy?
Yeah, no, my publisher literally did send him a copy, like asking him to blurb it, and his publicist was like, well, no promises, but send it over, and nothing. So maybe someday we'll find the magic combination of words for the email that will make him love me, but so far nothing doing. So he's number one.
Who's number two?
That's maybe Britney Spears. I feel like she would really like it there. Like, I feel like Britney Spears genuinely enjoys the food of the Cheesecake Factory.
Oh, yeah. Britney Spears would like order Santa Fe egg rolls and be like, this is sick. I love it here.
Yeah, she would do this gesture that everyone was doing in photos because we didn't know what to do with our hands. So she's number two, and I'll give a number three, which is JWoww from Jersey Shore. I think we would get really shithoused on like sugary shooters and just have a bomb ass time. So yeah, top three dates to the Friendship Heights Cheesecake Factory.
Those are all great choices. I love it. What is the tackiest place ever? Some options to consider: Las Vegas in the 2000s, Baltimore in the 70s, Coney Island in the 50s.
Vegas is a strong contender. Vegas really at any time. I mean, there's a fucking fly in my room. I don't know if y'all can see him on the camera, and I just look like I'm swatting at nothing, but I hate him. Vegas is a strong contender. Any period of Las Vegas's existence, like when it was being built up by the mob, when it was the site of the Frank Sinatra residency, whatever's going on there now, like Vegas is a contender, even just for being the home place of like Siegfried and Roy. That's already a significant mark in the Tacky column. Maybe Atlantic City, because it's
What I was going to ask is what would push
Vegas.
Vegas above Atlantic City in your mind?
I think that the legalized prostitution is kind of a point in Vegas's favor, just because so many people are so violently opposed to this thing that clearly brings Vegas visitors joy in its way. So I think that's a real point in Vegas's favor. But Atlantic City is just shittier and worse and cold. So I think that maybe Atlantic City is the winner for me.
Wow. Beautiful tacky oasis. Sue Edwards asks, what's the tackiest thing happening in culture these days, in your opinion?
Hi, Mom.
Oh.
That's my mommy.
Hi, Mom.
Maybe the fact that I was on Bravo and like so many people allowed that to happen, that's pretty fucked up. There were so many opportunities for that to be naysayed that people just did not take. People just allowed me to be on that channel and to talk a little bit, and that's pretty tacky to me. Really everything happening on Bravo. I know I said it before, but like Below Deck is my favorite thing on TV by a damn sight. Crazy tacky. Every person visiting that yacht is just the tackiest motherfucker I ever saw in my life.
The tension is like at 100 on that show. It's like every episode you're like,
yeah, I mean, I think part of it is it's the only reality show I can think of that's so centered around the service industry, which really is that tense and miserable. So it's like, for me as a service industry veteran of many years, I watch that and I'm like, I understand why you're upset. I understand why you're upset. I get all you people, and I've felt the same way so many times. Below Deck is a contender. I'm trying to think of music. I don't really listen to much music anymore.
right, because like One Direction probably like 5 years ago would have been tacky maybe, but Harry Styles has been commodified.
Yeah. They've co-opted Harry Styles.
I mean, like Pitbull maybe.
Mr. Worldwide.
Yeah, Mr. Worldwide, excuse me.
Is he still alive?
Isn't he still alive?
I don't know. I think I had like a Mandela effect thing where Pitbull was murdered.
What?
Is Pitbull alive?
I really think Pitbull's alive, but it's possible that this version of reality is true. And
he's alive, right? Yeah.
It's gotta be.
I would know for sure.
It could die.
That was just like a fleeting thought that I had. Like, Pitbull was totally murdered, and now I'm realizing he definitely was not. Yeah.
Food. Are there any foods that are tacky?
Espresso martini. That shit is having a revival for no good reason. It is disgusting. It should have died in the aughts with the Cosmopolitan.
Walk it back.
Fucking cancel me. I hate an espresso martini. Give me a vodka Red Bull if we're gonna go caffeinated. Or like a hard seltzer even is more respectable to me.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever had an espresso martini. So
you should try one just to learn how much it sucks, because people are going apeshit for them right now, and like 20-year-olds are going apeshit for them right now. I
keep seeing them, and it's a drink that I'll never order because I only want to make bartender's life as easy as possible in general. So I'm like, I can't possibly order that. That's gonna take at least 5 minutes. I also like kind of get off on being the most considerate person at the bar. Nobody notices. Nobody is going to give me a pat on the back for how uncomplicated my drink order is, but I do it every time regardless. All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like to say? Any more feelings? No, I don't think I do have any more feelings. No more feelings. No more. Like maybe ever again. You're just done, all wiped out.
Okay, well, thank you so much to you both. That was such a fun conversation. I know exactly which Cheesecake Factory you were talking about because I live near there. I'm like 20 minutes from there if I'm walking. And I think the whole area is Tacky.
It's
If
like
I'm
dying a little bit, Friendship Heights, because it was so shopping centric. There was no way for it to survive COVID.
I honestly think that like Friendship Heights and Chevy Chase in general like modernized once in the late 90s and then stopped.
Yeah.
They're like, all right, we're not gonna progress beyond this, and that's fine. I mean, there's like one Brooks Brothers there, and it's Last Breath, and I'm rooting for it, sort
Me
of,
too.
kind of. It's really expensive. Um,
Union made though, Brooks Brothers.
Is it?
on that
Yeah.
on that note, though, I do have one last question, and this is for both of you. We are a bookstore, so I might be legally obligated to ask this. What are you currently reading, and what would you guys like to suggest?
I just like literally just yesterday began reading the new Elena Ferrante book, The Lying Life of Adults. And I, again, very early days, but her writing is perfect every time in a way that consistently makes me angry and jealous. So even if this book turns out to improbably be a stinker, the Neapolitan novels are always perfect for any occasion.
Oh yeah. Thank you. Those I am really excited. It's out in paperback already, so
Yeah.
that's fun. And what about you, Kelsey? What's on your, well, I was gonna say you have a whole
I
bookshelf behind you, but what are you
yeah,
reading now?
truly. I was in like a big reading rut. And so I went back to a tried and true of mine, which is Joy Williams' The Changeling, which is
Mm.
just like a weird, fun little novel that I love. And I'm hoping to read her new one soon.
Oh yeah, it just came out. Yeah, that one looks really exciting too. It's her first in a while. So yeah, I hope that you both are enjoying your reading adventures, and I hope you all get to rest. Especially you, Rax, after this huge tour. But thank you everyone. Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you again, Rax, for just such a lovely, warm, fun conversation. We all wish like we could grab drinks with you guys after, but unfortunately, there's a pandemic. Anyway, and thank you also to the audience for coming tonight. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your time. Your patronage is what enables us to bring you programming like this, and we cannot continue to host these types of events without the book sales to support them. And you can do that by using the link in the chat to purchase Rax King's amazing essay collection, Tacky. And don't forget to check our website for the most up-to-date event listings, as we have an amazing list of author talks to choose from. And again, I can't say this enough, Kelsey and Rax, thank you so much for your time, for your energy, for just spending so much spending time with us. And we do hope to see everyone soon. And thank you once again for joining us this evening. So stay safe, stay warm, and stay well ready, everyone. We'll see you next time. Have a good night, guys.